Let's try to wrap up week one. There are a few things that go back to the first part of the novel and or carry over into the next part of the novel as well. But I think that we need to just kind of look at the novel as a whole and pick up some of the things I forgot from last time. And we'll probably pick up some of the things in this chapter or this section that I should have talked about today. We'll pick those up on Monday. First thing I want to talk about is Woody Guthrie. I've made a big deal out of the fact that I strongly disagree with their assessment of Woody Guthrie. I think Guthrie is an interesting character to throw into this novel. Um, I think Guthrie, in a lot of ways, was the exact opposite of the kids who are growing up in a fairly well to do subdivision. And I think that Woody Guthrie is always somebody who is quotable. Um, I think this might well be the picture that they saw in Margot's room. And I just think that it's important to understand that as a folk singer, he was singing for the common man. He was working for the common man. And I just want to take a minute or two to defend Woody Guthrie and say that he was probably far more important to American culture than uh, Green or the characters Green created give him credit for. It's nothing that's ever going to be in a quiz. It's nothing that's going to be something that you'll need to know for your future, but it is something I feel better now that I have defended Woody Guthrie. One of the things I said that was important for me as a teacher is to get you to think about making connections. On page 80, we had Q making a connection, or excuse me, we had Q having an epiphany. That night with Margot Roth Spiegelman was a night that was going to change his life. It was a night where he stepped out, where he did something that he wasn't comfortable with, and he is now having this epiphany. He has changed. And because he has changed, he has to wonder uh, whether things will be different tomorrow. And the fact of the matter is, one of the strange things about epiphanies in a lot of books is that we never get to see tomorrow. We never get to see whether the epiphany plays out. We never get to see the long term consequences of this new realization. We're on page 80. We have 240 pages to go. We get to wonder whether this first epiphany is going to be something that plays out. And yet, it makes me wonder whether Green was consciously or unconsciously copying one of the classics from the 1980s. In the 1980s, there was a movie, The Breakfast Club. Molly Ringwald, Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Hirsch. And in this movie, if you have not seen it, they're stuck in detention together. And we have the stereotypical characters: the goth girl, the nerd, the socialite, the jock, the tough guy from the wrong side of town. In their morning of detention, they all become friends. They all confront each other. They all become friends. But at the very end, they've had this epiphany. They're all kids. They're all in detention. They're all having an experience that has taught them something, but they wonder what's going to happen on Monday. The movie never gives us the chance to deal with what happens on Monday. It ends. The novel, I think, gives us a chance to see whether Q can build on the epiphany he's having. And so it's important, I think, at several points to make connections. First connection is with the lit term epiphany. The second connection is with another art form, in this case, the film. And the third connection is with two different time periods. 2008, I believe, is when this book came out. 1980s is when The Breakfast Club came out. And how do we make connections across time from the classroom to the film? And how do we make connections in general within the novel? The other thing that I think happens is we have not only Woody Guthrie, and we not only have other bands mentioned and music mentioned throughout, we not only have allusions to Wikipedia in the form of Omni Dictionary, we have Leaves of Grass, we have a quotation about mirrors and windows that we'll spend some time on during the next presentation. And then we have Moby freaking Dick. Okay. And with Moby Dick on pages 123 and 159, Green, I think, is just using this as a way to shorthand a whole bunch of things. And one of the things I think that's important to understand is it's not only just to, it's not important, excuse me. One of the things I think that is important to understand is that it's not just the ability to recognize the illusion, it's the ability to recognize the weight that the illusion carries. Moby Dick is all about obsession. Moby Dick is all about chasing something that cannot be caught. Moby Dick is about one guy out to do this thing that he probably has no business trying to do, and all of the consequences that come along with that. And a lot of those consequences may well be tragic. And so Moby Dick is a shorthand that gets tossed in here, and Leaves of Grass perhaps is a shorthand. And the quotation about mirrors and windows is a shorthand. But I think it's important because we not only have these three, we have the strings, we have all these other things that he's doing. And it's important to understand what's the effect of all of these things, what's accomplished with all of these things, not just recognize that Moby Dick was a famous novel from the 1800s by Herman Melville, or that Leaves of Grass is a poem that almost every English class teaches at some time or another by Walt Whitman. What exactly is the impact of these? What is the shorthand that the author is trying to get us to see by throwing this in there? And I mentioned strings before. We have a new string. We have the string attached to the balloon. We have the string that gets cut. We have this very profound statement about once the string gets cut, you can't uncut it. And you've got this idea of because the string has been cut and the balloon has floated away, you don't want to float away too. Stay anchored to the ground. And again, remember that he's talking to Q. He's talking to a kid who likes being bored. He's talking to the kid of all the students, or of all the characters in this book, excuse me. He's talking to the kid who's the most anchored. But I do think it's important to understand that we have one more thing full of strings. And if you start going back, I think you'll see that he's asking the strings to do a lot of work, and he is changing the metaphor of the strings at his whim as he goes through this novel. And we have a couple more. She wanted me to play out the string. And for those of you unfamiliar with that idiom, it's the idea of she wanted me to see it through to the end, even if there's little hope of success. And here I think Q is probably starting to act like that romantic knight. And again, we will pick that up more. I think Q starts making some of those connections himself. But we also perhaps are getting a bit of obsession here. We're starting to see the Moby Dick thing play out as Q is becoming obsessed. She wants me to chase her. She wants me to play out the string. And that sort of obsession, I think, is going to cause a lot of problems in the novel. You, as a reader who is, if you've read any novel at all, any works of literature at all, should start thinking about the idea that obsession is a relatively terrible thing most of the time. Obsession is what brings about the downfall of all the great heroes in Greek tragedy, for example. And finally, I just want to talk about the fact that one of the criticisms I have of this novel, and one of the things I think you can tell me I'm wrong about, is that Green is throwing the kitchen sink at us. Two classics, a more contemporary band, famous folk singer. strings, grass, mirrors, all of these metaphors going through this whole novel. And it becomes, I think, a bit overwhelming trying to sort everything through. Not to mention the fact that there's going to be the quest and what will amount to a Bildungsroman, and not to mention we're supposed to have characters and developments and treat the senior year of high school somewhat realistically. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and I don't know if Green handles it cleanly. I've also talked before about characters. One of your first writing was who or what is Margot Roth Spiegelman? The second, it's not going to be the daily writing assignment for today, but I do think we have to look at who are these people. And there are several ways to figure out who these people are. And one of them is just by trying to figure out who these people are by what they say. And we have been, and honest to God, I've known some people with perverted minds. Try to be kind. I don't know if I've ever met anybody who was quite this open and this upfront about it. And it's one of the things I'll talk about in class, and it's one of the things you can bring up on Monday of whether or not you actually know a Ben. Radar, it strikes me, is also a little bit problematic. But whoops, my bad. Let me get back here. Remember, it's always one take. Radar is a little bit less problematic, but again, the kid who spends his whole time working on the equivalent of Wikipedia, is that realistic given the other things we know about him? And so I think when we take a look at these two characters, are they believable? Do they grow? Do they change? And how can we describe them? Remember that characterization is how the author develops the character. And we determine that by what the character says, what the character does, how other characters react to what the character says or does, and whether the character changes throughout the novel, whether they are static, which means that they are absolutely the same beginning to end, or whether they are dynamic. They change from the beginning through the middle through the end. I think it's important to take a look also at how we can express characterization. We can make connections with concrete nouns. We can make connections with adjectives. This person is a pervert. Okay, concrete noun. We can talk about this person reminds me of somebody I know. But always with characterization, I think that there are two important things. Can we back it up with specific examples and specific quotations from the novel and explain how those examples and how those quotations prove the point? And can we ask whether the character has changed and whether what prompted that change and whether the change is realistic based on the prompt that caused the change, the event that prompted the change? Is that change realistic? Characterization is kind of a combination of all of those things. And characterization done well means we're dealing with a real person. And characterization done well should remind us of real people, and it should allow us to make connections. Everything in the novel should allow us to connect to something. Some movie we saw in the past, The Breakfast Club, somebody we know. However, we want to go about doing it, I think it has to be a key element of reading, okay, of becoming a good reader. And then the second thing I think is we can make assertions and we can argue about those assertions we're making, but we always should have specific quotations. We always should have concrete details from the novel to back up our assertions, whether it's characterization or anything else that we're going to be doing. Verisimilitude. It's a word I mispronounce frequently. I think I got it right this time. And it's the appearance of being true or real. And in the novel, it's the quality of accurately reflecting everyday existence. It's you are all much closer to high school than I am. And so I think it's kind of up to you to tell me whether this novel is accurate, whether Ben and Radar and Q and Lacey and Margot are at least close to accurate. Remember, it's fiction. Remember that characters in a novel are generally too good or too evil. Characters in a novel are generally not totally real, but are they real enough? Is there the verisimilitude that we can look at in the setting, in the characters, and I think that's an important thing to be thinking about as you're writing your summary response paper or think about the summary response paper. This is one of the things you can evaluate. This is one of the things you can respond to. Finally, I talked about the commonplace book and that the purpose of the commonplace book for this class is to react to quotations. I've picked two of them from this passage, from this section that you were supposed to be reading, that I think might work. Both of them were things that Q said. First one is nothing is as boring as other people's dreams. It seems to me that that's a kind of accurate statement. We all think our dreams are important, other people's perhaps not so much. So I think it's important to react to that and what it says about the character, what it says about us. And in the commonplace book, it's just a reaction. You can veer away from the novel if you want to. The other one, this is the fear that made fish crawl out onto dry land and evolve lungs. The fear that teaches us to run, the fear that makes us bury our dead. Is this quotation something that a high school senior would say? Is this quotation obvious hyperbole? Is this quotation something that, does this quotation, reflect an experience that you've had at some level? And again, the commonplace quotation books or the commonplace books, have the quotations, you write in the quotation, and then you respond to it. I'll talk more about that as we go. I'll make sure I have everything posted in D2L so that you can do this. But these are the kinds of quotations that I think you should be looking for as you're going to write them in the commonplace book. Once again, I'm always trying to take this in one take. I apologize for the slip ups and the stutters and the stammers. I apologize for a Thursday afternoon voice where I'm not used to talking this much because I haven't had to stand in front of a class for a whole week since March. I hope that you all have a good weekend. Please, please, please remember to do the daily writing that's on the D2L page so that I can submit attendance. The boss people want attendance submitted every day. So help me keep my boss people happy. And once again, have a good weekend. And if you're in the group that's watching this, we'll see you in class on Monday.